What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
No gifts. No call. Nothing 5 years straight. I told myself after the first time that maybe they simply forgot, that work or stress or something else had pushed my birthday to the back of their minds. But by the third year, the excuse had worn thin, and by the fifth, it had become an undeniable pattern. A ritual of silence that spoke louder than any words could. I still remember the sting when I woke up that morning, scrolling through my phone, secretly hoping that maybe this year would be different. Maybe I'd see a message from mom or dad, even something as lazy as a generic happy birthday text. But the screen stayed empty except for spam emails and one discount code from a clothing store. It's hard to describe how humiliating it feels to realize the people who raised you cannot even bother to dial your number once a year, as if acknowledging you is an unbearable inconvenience. I told myself I'd keep it together, that I'd just go about my day, but then came the moment that broke whatever patience I had left. My sister Ashley had posted on Instagram, bright morning light hitting the driveway just right, a gleaming silver car sitting there with a massive red bow on the hood, her face tilted perfectly for the camera as she smiled like the world was made just for her. The caption burned itself into my brain. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Best surprise ever. She had added little hearts and sparkles, of course, because Ashley never did anything without putting her entire life on display. And in that instant, I wasn't just angry, I was gutted, because while they couldn't even spare a phone call for me, they had gone all out for her, posting their love for the world to see, wrapping it up in shiny metal and ribbon. It wasn't just favoritism, it was humiliation, and they hadn't even cared enough to hide it. The flood of comments praising her, friends writing how lucky she was to have such amazing parents, nearly made me throw my phone across the room. I stared at the screen and thought, maybe I've been stupid this whole time, waiting for crumbs of affection, when the truth has been sitting in front of me all along. Ashley is the star, and I'm the afterthought. It was like a childhood suspicion finally confirmed in front of an audience of strangers. I remembered every holiday when she got the spotlight, every school event where they bragged about her grades while ignoring mine, every family dinner where my achievements were met with polite nods while hers were toasted like victories for the entire bloodline. Seeing that car with the bow tied it all together, the proof that I wasn't imagining it. I decided right then that I was finished. I didn't want explanations, I didn't want excuses, and I definitely didn't want another year of waiting for something that was never coming. I blocked them on social media, silenced the family group chat, and for the first time in my life, I let myself stop caring about being the good daughter who kept trying no matter how little they gave in return. It felt both terrifying and freeing, like I was standing on a cliff edge looking down at years of pain and finally deciding I didn't have to keep climbing the same jagged rocks anymore. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and thought about the years I had wasted bending over backwards to prove my worth to people who had already decided where I stood in their hierarchy. I thought about how Ashley would never even notice that my birthday had passed in silence, too busy posting pictures of her shiny car, her nails, her dinners, her entire curated little world. And I wondered if Mom and Dad even cared that I had stopped answering, or if they'd just keep pretending nothing was wrong until the day came when we were strangers in name as well as in feeling. But 2 days later, just when I had convinced myself that silence would stretch forever, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened the door, I nearly laughed at the sight because it felt like a scene ripped out of some bad drama. There was my mother, standing on the porch, her face blotchy and red, tears streaking her cheeks like she had rehearsed grief in the mirror before driving over. She clutched her bag like it was holding her upright, and her voice cracked as she said my name, almost a plea, almost a confession. For a second, I wanted to slam the door, to prove I could be as cold as they had been, but the shock of seeing her there rooted me to the spot. My mother, who hadn't picked up the phone in 5 years, was suddenly standing on my porch like a ghost that had decided to knock. And with that single sight, my neat decision to cut them off started to feel a lot more complicated, because I couldn't shake the question that came with her tears. Why now? She stood there like the weather had personally offended her, jaw trembling, mascara smudged into soft shadows that made her look older than I wanted to admit. And when she reached for a hug, I stepped back just enough to make it clear that whatever this was would happen on the porch with the door still between us. Because if 5 long years of silence had trained me in anything, it was boundary setting with a smile that says I can be polite and firm at the same time. She started in on the classics, the nostalgia reel she knows by heart, the one with baby photos and first recitals, and the time I split my chin on the coffee table, and she swore she held me the entire night while I slept upright on her shoulder, and I let her talk. Because it is easier to let a river run than to try to dam it with bare hands, and because I could hear under every sentimental scene the one blunt instrument she never names out loud, which is that the golden child got golden treatment, and the sturdy child got assigned to carry everyone else's weight without complaint. When I finally said that 5 birthdays had passed without so much as a call, not even a comment under a photo, not even a lazy recycled wish dressed up with an exclamation point, her face tried on a dozen expressions in quick succession. Denial and confusion and fragile comedy and wounded pride, until she settled into that prim lecture tone that always makes my teeth ache, and she told me they had believed I was doing well, that I was independent, that I did not need the fuss, while Ashley had needed more support and more attention because, and this is where her voice softened like a gauze bandage, she is sensitive and easily overwhelmed. It is a strange experience to be told that your competence is the reason you have been erased, that the prize for being steady is to be treated like furniture, useful yet invisible. And I could feel the old anger rising like heat from summer pavement as I reminded her that support is not a finite pie to be sliced only for the loudest mouth, that a birthday call is not a luxury item, that love is not a scholarship you lose once you stop crying at the right volume, and she blinked hard and whispered that I was being cruel, which almost made me laugh out loud given the museum of quiet cruelties we never catalogued, the ones you can only see when you stand under better light. She asked to come inside, said she was embarrassed by the neighbors seeing her with puffy eyes, and I told her we could keep it out here for a few minutes more because I had something important to ask. And I brought out 2 folding chairs and set them facing the street like a pair of lifeguard posts, which for once made her follow my lead instead of dragging me into the living room where the family script always wins. And I went back in for a single cupcake I had bought for myself 2 days earlier and placed it on the little porch table, lit the candle with the same lighter I use for my stubborn stove, and told her that if she wanted to speak to me she would have to start by singing, properly and all the way through. Because if she could not be bothered to call on the actual day, then she could at least put her voice in the air now and let the sound carry. She stared at the candle like it might explode, cheeks stiff with insult, but then something in her posture sagged and she began, halting at first, and then steadier, voice thin yet unmistakably hers. And I recorded exactly 30 seconds on my phone and posted it to my story with a caption that said, in the most even tone I could manage, "First song in 5 years, delivered curbside, thank you for the effort," which was, in its small and undeniably petty way, the most satisfying piece of revenge I had allowed myself in a very long time, because it was not vicious or untrue or designed to humiliate, it was simply a receipt stapled to reality and handed back to the original sender. When she finished I blew out the candle, cut the cupcake in half, and handed her a piece on a paper napkin, and for a moment we were 2 people sharing a quiet minute and not a mother and daughter counting the cost of a long drought. But then she cleared her throat and told me that the car was not what I thought, that there were circumstances, that Ashley had been through something and they had stepped in as any parents would, and I said that if the circumstances included bow-wrapped public adoration then I was confused why the private corrections never arrived at my door, and she pressed her lips together and said that I was not ready to hear the whole story. I told her readiness is a strange requirement to introduce after 5 years of silence and 2 days of tears, that truth tends to arrive on its own calendar, and she asked whether I would at least consider calling my father because he was taking the fallout badly. Family calling with questions, cousins sending screenshots, the narrative getting away from them, and I shrugged in a way that said I had run out of patience for press management, because for once the narrative belonged to me, and if they did not like the sound of it perhaps they should have written a better one. She stood, folding the napkin with the precision of a person avoiding the next line of a script, and then she set it down and leaned forward with a sudden urgency that shook her voice into something raw and unpracticed. And she said that the car was not paid for the way everyone believed, that the bow and the caption were a performance they tolerated because it kept Ashley from unraveling. And that if I pushed this any further, I would drag into daylight a debt and a mistake that might swallow more than my pride. And when I asked her to stop speaking in riddles and start speaking like a mother who trusts her adult child with facts, she looked past me toward the doorway I still hadn't opened and whispered that the car was never meant to be a gift at all. She did not say it outright at first, because my mother has always preferred the safety of suggestion to the hazard of confession. But when I kept my hand on the doorknob without turning it and let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable enough to force her into specifics, she finally blurted that the car post was theater for Ashley's benefit and for the benefit of everyone Ashley performs for, that there was no gift in the real sense because my sister had not qualified for the terms. She wanted that the dealer had dangled a glittering lease with ridiculous conditions, and that somewhere in the fine print there existed a signature that looked very much like mine. I felt the air change in my throat the way it does when you swallow wrong, because there are levels of favoritism you think you understand, and then there is the discovery that your name might be the scaffolding holding up the show, and I asked her to say it in plain English. No metaphors, no phrasing that sounds like a prayer, and she stared at the porch light as if clarity could be found in a bug's frantic orbit before admitting that Dad had kept a scan of my old apartment guarantor form from years back, the one I signed when I first moved out, that he believed it was practically the same thing as co-signing now because we were family and because I was stable and responsible and unlikely to make a fuss. And that when Ashley spiraled over being told she needed a stronger cosigner, he passed the scan to a slick man with a folder and a smile who said he could make the system happy without bothering me. It is remarkable how quickly a pulse can leap from wounded to methodical, because once she said the quiet part one did not raise my voice or deliver a porch sermon about boundaries or scream about criminal nonsense. I simply told her to sit and watch while I took my phone, opened a credit app one rarely use, ordered a full report, and waited for the little wheel to spin as if the entire history of their choices lived inside that spinning circle. And when the report appeared with a tastefully formatted line showing a late summer lease opened in my name with a monthly payment that could fund a modest vacation, I felt something in me settle not into despair or fury, but into a crisp certainty that I had been made into collateral without consent, and that the only reasonable response would be both surgical and unignorable. I filed a fraud alert with the bureaus while she whispered that I was overreacting and that this would embarrass Ashley, and I thought, yes, that is rather the point. Though embarrassment is the least of what you deserve when you build your status on borrowed identity and sentimental blackmail. And then I called the lender, announced that a contract appeared on my file bearing a suspect signature, and requested the fraud department with the calm voice I use when customer service scripts try to drown me in apologies, because calm is the blade that cuts cleaner than rage, and I took notes with times and names, and I asked for the recording consent number, and I asked which documents they believed constituted my authorization. And by the time the representative admitted that the copy on file was blurry and that verification would require a signed affidavit, I already knew exactly how my evening would end. My first piece of revenge was quiet and almost elegant, the kind that looks like manners from a distance, because I boxed up the cupcake candle stub, slid it into a small gift bag, and sent my mother home with instructions to tell my father that a notary would be involved and that any further communication should arrive through email so I could forward it to the lender's fraud address without distorting the chain, and then, once the car-shaped lie was officially on a collision course with daylight, I walked to my desk, wrote a simple card that said return to sender, you forgot the cosigner, tucked it into a tasteful bouquet ordered to Ashley's office for morning delivery, and scheduled a story with a single sentence about consent not being a courtesy, but a precondition, which was petty and sharp and absolutely earned. I know there will be people who say I went too far, that I could have handled it privately, that a ruined mood at work or a startled receptionist is collateral I should have protected even if they did not protect me. And I can already hear the lecture about family unity and public restraint, but there is a special kind of absurdity in being told to protect the feelings of the person who climbed on your shoulders to take a better photo. And while I am not proud of enjoying the small spike of adrenaline that came with scheduling that delivery, I am honest enough to admit it felt like air after years of being the lung that never asks for breath. The lender called back faster than I expected, a number with a city code I recognized from my old corporate days, and the woman on the line had the no-nonsense tone of someone who has heard every story in the book and can spot the ones that end in handcuffs. And she told me the account would be placed under review with a temporary hold on automatic payments, that they might need to speak with the dealership and with any party who presented identification on my behalf, and that if the signature comparison came back inconsistent, there would be steps I should be prepared for, including the possibility of retrieval of the vehicle pending investigation, which landed in my ear like a bell. Bright and cold and echoing with consequences I did not entirely intend yet could not find it in myself to prevent. After I hung up, I texted my mother a single line telling her she had until morning to inform Ashley before a stranger did, that I refused to be the one cleaning up truth they scattered like confetti, and then I set a freeze on my credit, shut off the porch light, and stood in the dark with the uneasy knowledge that righteous action can still bruise people you might, in weaker moments, want to love. And just as I turned from the door, my phone lit up with an incoming call from my father, his name flashing across the screen like an old headline, and behind it a second notification from an unknown number labeled dealership compliance, both of them clawing for the same first answer I was no longer willing to give. I let the calls stack like unpaid tickets on a windshield because there is a certain discipline in refusing to be dragged into a familiar shouting match, and when I finally answered the dealership compliance number instead of my father's, I did it with the kind of calm you practice only after years of being told to be the bigger person while someone else collects the presents, and the man on the line, efficient and almost bored, asked me to confirm that I had not personally signed in the showroom, that I had not presented an ID or a pay stub, that the signature on their copy did not belong to my hand, and when I said the word no 3 times with the clarity of a bell, I heard the tone on his end shift from routine to alert, as if a light had flipped in a back office and someone was already opening a binder labeled exposure. My father rang again before I could breathe, and I picked up this time because there are moments when silence becomes an alibi for the other side, and he launched into the kind of lecture that smells like cigar smoke and entitlement, scolding me for going nuclear, for embarrassing the family, for jeopardizing Ashley's stability, and when I asked which part of forgery fell under the umbrella of stability, he swore it was not forgery, it was a workaround, a small administrative kindness, a family favor that would never have touched me because they intended to make every payment on time, and I told him a favor requires a yes, that intent is not a receipt, and that if he wanted to speak in euphemisms he should call the florist, because compliance departments prefer nouns that stand up in court. He threatened to make it right quietly if I withdrew the fraud claim, promised to sell the car in a few months, promised to move money around, promised a dinner where we could talk like adults, and I let him run until the promises tangled themselves into knots. Then I said that the only quiet I was interested in was the silence of a clean report and a notarized letter admitting exactly what they had done, names spelled correctly, dates accurate, no passive voice smearing responsibility across the weather like fog, and that until those 2 items existed my cooperation would be limited to answering calls from entities with legal stationery. Ashley broke through next with a barrage of messages that read like an audition tape spliced with an infomercial, pouting claims about anxiety and humiliation and how I had always resented her shine, punctuated by a screenshot of the bouquet sitting at her receptionist's desk like a bomb with ribbon, and I typed a single line that I deleted and retyped twice before sending because even when you are right you can still be cruel, then sent the version that said very plainly that anxiety is not a power of attorney and that I would consider pausing the fraud review only if she corrected the record where she harvested the applause, which meant a post from her account stating that the car had not been a gift, that my name had been used without permission, and that I had asked for privacy while the paperwork was untangled, and she responded with a laugh emoji that felt like high school and then offered an alternative where she posted a moody quote about storms and resilience, and I told her that weather metaphors were for people who had umbrellas with receipts. The dealership called back with a request for a sworn statement and copies of my ID, and the woman who took over the line this time had the clipped kindness of a nurse who knows the patient is in pain, but still needs the four placed, and she explained that, depending on the verification they received from the lender and from the store manager who approved the deal, the account could be set to disputed status and the vehicle flagged, which in practice meant that a tow might be scheduled pending the outcome, and I said I understood and that I would sign whatever was required before lunch, and when I ended the call my hands were steady in a way they had not been in months, because it is astonishing how quickly dignity returns when you stop bargaining for it. By early afternoon, the bouquet had done its job better than I intended, which I will admit with the kind of honesty I prefer in other people, because a cousin reposted my one-sentence story with a caption about consent. Then an aunt commented under Ashley's latest mirror selfie asking whether bows come with fine print. Then a family friend messaged me to say she had always wondered why I was missing from the sunshine posts. And while I do not need the chorus to sing my name to know I am not crazy, the sound of other voices naming the thing I had carried alone for years lifted something heavy off my ribs that I had mistaken for posture. My mother texted a photo of a draft apology letter full of words like miscommunication and misunderstanding and regret that did not belong to anyone in particular. And I replied with marked-up edits the way I used to when she sent me college essays for my brother, changing miscommunication to unauthorized, changing happened to as done, inserting the verbs that carry weight. And when she called to say my edits were harsh, I told her that precision is the kindest possible instrument at this stage, because it builds a bridge that might actually hold. For my revenge that day, I avoided spectacle and chose something that looked almost administrative, because it is one thing to clap back online and quite another to alter the choreography of the next 24 hours. So I filed a simple form with the Homeowners Association where Ashley parks, providing the disputed VIN and asserting that my consent had not been given for the placement of a vehicle encumbered by a contested contract on private property where I hold rights as a named resident on the deed, and within minutes the management office updated the guest list to exclude that plate, which meant the neighborhood tow would not need a lender's permission if the car stayed longer than the posted limit, and I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the quiet of my street, feeling neither triumphant nor vindictive so much as clean, which is a feeling I would wish for anyone who has been used as a signature on someone else's bow. Near dusk, just as the sky was tipping into that washout blue that makes everything look a little honest, a text from Ashley arrived. Not a paragraph this time, but a photo of her standing beside the car with the bow removed and a caption typed, but not yet posted, that read, in plain language, that she had used my name without permission and that she was sorry. And below it another message from my father saying he would sign whatever the lender required if I promised not to let anyone take the car, and under that a voicemail from an unknown number that began with a flat tone and the words "This is a courtesy call regarding vehicle retrieval scheduling," which layered themselves into a single, complicated chord I could not quite place. A sound that felt like justice and loss playing the same note. I listened to the layered messages until they felt like a single voice wearing different masks. Then I called my mother, because she was the only one who had stepped onto my porch with her eyes open and her hands shaking, and I told her very calmly that I would offer one last, narrow bridge, not because they had earned it, but because I wanted to know who they were when the performance lights went off, and the bridge was simple, which is the only way bridges hold. A mobile notary at my place in the late morning. A sworn admission signed by both parents describing exactly how my name had been used, an immediate call to the lender authorizing them to place the account under full dispute without interference, and a public correction from Ashley posted before noon in the same tone and volume as the bow-wrapped caption, after which I would ask the lender to allow a voluntary surrender rather than a repo truck, meaning the car would be returned with minimum spectacle and the paper trail would read like responsibility instead of seizure. And when my mother asked whether there was any room for grace, I told her this was grace, that grace without accountability is just a coupon for more of the same. They arrived late with the kind of fluster that pretends to be urgency, my father stiff and red at the edges, my mother folded into herself like she was trying to make less surface area for shame to cling to, and Ashley trailing behind with a hoodie and sunglasses and a rehearsed limp I had not seen the day before. And if that sounds uncharitable, I will admit that generosity is harder when you are required to extend it to the hand that forged your name. But it softened, against my own will. When Ashley pulled the glasses off and I saw the swollen lids and the rawness around the mouth that argues with vanity and loses, and before I could speak, she said in a low voice that the car had never been about luxury, that it was about control, and that her last boyfriend left her on the side of the freeway with the keys in his pocket and a thread in his smile, which my parents decided could be solved by making sure she never relied on anyone again, that the post had been a performance to reclaim something she did not know how to hold without applause, and while none of that revised the ledger of what they did to me, it pressed a thumb into a bruise I did not realize I was still carrying. The one that says the loud child who gets everything is sometimes simply the child who learned to survive by being seen. The notary spread papers across the dining table like a small court, steady and unbothered, and my father balked at my edits, as if verbs were knives rather than tools. Yet he signed because the lender's hold had already choked his plans and because the word retrieval makes pride sound cheap, and my mother signed with a pen that scratched like it was writing on bark, and Ashley typed her post with slow, careful fingers, pausing twice to ask whether the phrase without permission sounded like a lawsuit, and I said it sounded like the truth and that she could add that I had requested privacy, not because I was shielding them, but because I am done living as content for people who send their compassion to the wrong addresses. There is a part of me that wanted the scene to end right there with the quiet dignity of documents and a clean handoff, but endings rarely choose elegance over gravity. And while the notary packed her case and my parents made their strained thank you noises that mean maybe we will live to negotiate another day, my phone lit with a new message from a cousin I barely speak to anymore. An old photo of a cake with the words Sweet 18 piped in shaky frosting and a caption that said, "Do you remember?" And under it a second photo from the same year showing Ashley in a hospital wristband with a cut on her forehead and our father standing in the background looking like a man trying not to be photographed. And suddenly the missing piece slid into view with a click I felt in my molars, because I remembered that year. The night our parents arrived to my tiny campus apartment with tight smiles and told me college savings were complicated and that I was resourceful and could handle loans better than my sister could handle a setback, and now here was the answer they never offered and I never received. They had emptied my future to patch a present they could not bear to see rupture. I looked up from the phone and asked my mother whether the accident had been the reason birthdays turned quiet, whether the silence had begun as a way to avoid looking straight at the ledger they had redrawn in their heads. And she started to cry the way people cry when they are relieved to be guilty out loud, saying they told themselves the celebration would wait until they could replace what they had taken, that 1 year became 2 and then 3 and then 5 because the math never cooperated and shame thickened into habit, and that every time my day approached she felt like she was staring at a bill she could not pay, and while that confession did not absolve the forgery or the years of neglect, it did rearrange the furniture in the room so that grief and fury could at least sit down without elbowing each other in the ribs. For my last revenge, I chose something that would not feed the family's appetite for spectacle yet would live longer than a tow truck. Because if there is anything favoritism teaches you, it is that attention is a currency and there are better investments than public shaming, so I opened my laptop and drafted a short, sharp email to the lender confirming the voluntary surrender and asking for written acknowledgement that my dispute had been validated. Then I forwarded the notarized admission and the affidavit to a folder labeled Winter, which my attorney friend knows is code for open if I ever start doubting myself again. And then I took the credit freeze confirmation and the HOA correspondence and bundled them with a letter removing my parents from every emergency contact and beneficiary form they still occupied, not as an act of cruelty, but as an act of hygiene. And finally, I scheduled a modest monthly transfer to a local fund that helps first-generation students cover application fees and deposits, naming it after no one, least of all myself, but attaching a note that said in the space where a bow would go that independence should never be punished for being quiet. They left with dull eyes and a hard silence that felt almost clean, Ashley clutching her phone like it was a flotation device, my father making a point of holding the door for my mother as if manners could repaint the past. And after they turned the corner, I stood at the window and watched a nondescript sedan idle near the curb, the driver on his phone waiting for a signal that might send him toward an address I did not provide, and I realized that, whether the car went back today or tomorrow, or never, whether Ashley kept it under new papers or returned it under our names, the debt that mattered most had finally moved into a ledger I could read without hating myself for squinting, which is not triumph exactly, but something steadier. Like a floor that does not tilt when you put your full weight on it. Hours later, when the street was empty and the house had settled into the small clicks of nighttime, a final buzz from my phone announced a post from Ashley, a photo of an empty driveway and a caption that did not reach for poetry. Only the plain admission we had agreed upon and a line that said, "I will fix what I can and learn to live with what I cannot," and I lay back on the couch with a strange lightness, sitting side by side with a sorrow I could not evict, because endings that feel honest always come furnished with both, and as I closed my eyes the porch memory replayed itself with new color, the candle, the song, the half cupcake. And I thought that maybe forgiveness is not a door you open for the people who wronged you, but a window you crack for yourself so you can breathe while you decide whether to stay. And if that sounds like I am still undecided, it is because I am. And because certainty is its own kind of bow that I am not ready to tie.